Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. I am your host, astrologer Shannon Cunningham, and today we are going to dive into the transit of Saturn through Aries. And we're going to go ahead and look at this from a personal perspective. So we'll look at how we can all utilize this in our own personal lives, and then we'll take this through sign by sign to see how this is going to impact us all individually based on our own personal charts. Before we dive into it, I want to announce that we are going to be starting a new Chart Your Destiny giveaway. So if you would like to be entered to receive a free personal reading with me, all you have to do is make sure that you're subscribed, give the video a like, leave a comment below with your city or nation, or even just let us know that you are from Earth if you don't want to go any more specific than that, and you will be entered to win a free reading. And I will announce the winner of that giveaway on July 1st. But with all of that said, let's go ahead and dive into it. So I have our dates here. We're going to have Saturn move into Aries on the 24th of May, and it will stay in Aries until the 1st of September of this year. It will then retrograde back into Pisces, where it's been for a few years now, and it'll stay there until the day before Valentine's Day, the 13th of February of 2026, and then it'll move on into Aries until the 12th of April of 2028. So pretty much from this month through April of 2028, we're basically dealing with Saturn in Aries. Now, I also have this other glyph here, which is Neptune, and we will need to keep in mind that these two are going to be in this sign together for the whole time that Saturn's here as well. So I will mention that here and there throughout this video. So when Saturn transits Aries, we are asked to confront the tension between impulse and responsibility primarily, as well as independence versus structure. Aries really charges ahead, while Saturn demands a lot of accountability, and this is not an easy fusion between the two of them. Saturn doesn't particularly like to be in this sign because it's not very aligned with its own nature, and therefore we will be doing a bit of a balancing act between the Saturnian archetype, which we will be attempting to embody in order to utilize this transit as well as we can, and then the Arian impulse that we're going to see underlying that as well. So we're going to have to meld these together. It won't necessarily be the easiest thing to do, but for those who can really master this over the coming years, there will for sure be some wonderful rewards from that. So while this isn't an easy fusion, it is definitely a very powerful one. So hopefully this can serve as a guide to mastering this transit, rising really through its challenges and building a legacy of courage, integrity, and real progress through the coming few years. So first off, we'll need to lead with integrity, not ego. So this transit's going to test what leadership really means. It's not about domination. It's not about bravado. It's really then about showing up with integrity, courage, and clarity. So during this period of time, it would be wisest to step into leadership roles with strategy and patience. So avoid impulsive power grabs or shallow ambitions, as those are the things that are most likely to backfire during this time. Also, make sure that you're upholding ethical standards even when it is difficult, perhaps especially when it's difficult, because authority gained through substance is going to last, and that which is going to be gained through force during this time will wind up crumbling. So the guidance when it comes to leadership here is to be the leader who listens, who plans and acts with purpose, and through that you'll earn deep respect and not just a sense of fleeting control. Additionally, both of these sides here have to do with timing, and that's going to also be a bit of a balancing act. So you may feel the pressure to go now, but Saturn teaches that pacing really is power here. So channel your fire, channel your impulse into focused action rather than scattered bursts. So try really to structure then the energy and the drive as it arises. Discipline will help you to break free from destructive impatience. We're really going to be feeling caught between feeling rushed and feeling impatient. But even so, this balancing act, it's going to become easier with time because it's going to feel more and more natural as we go along with this transit. And ultimately then, throughout this whole time, endurance, not speed, is what's going to lead to achievement under this transit. So with this really slowing down to move forward, building habits that support long-term goals rather than short-lived victories is going to serve us really well too. Additionally, choosing our battles wisely is going to be really paramount. So conflict is a major theme with this transit, but so are the consequences then of unchecked aggression. So even though we may encounter this in other people, it's how we handle it that is really going to impact us personally. So learn personally to resist the urge to react, but rather than try to respond strategically to any given situations, especially again, if someone else is being kind of aggressive. And understand that anger can be righteous, but it must be directed and grounded in order to be effectively utilized toward a specific goal. And during this time as well, recklessness will surely be punished. Humility is a really strong shield here too. And taking the wisdom of experience and utilizing that as the framework through which you decide whether or not to act, that's really going to be the best. So fighting only then the battles that really matter, and fighting them only when you have clarity around it. And you're quite then also clear that you're not moving from a place of ego. So resistance is going to be a major theme throughout this whole period of time, but try your best to let that resistance be informed rather than reactive. And if you do that, then your resistance should actually be quite effective under this transit. This will help with a resistant, independent type of an energy, but it's about mastering how to utilize it and how to pace that. And then, of course, choosing those battles. So rebelling then with purpose and trying to avoid chaos. So the instinct to break free is going to intensify during this time, but rebellion for its own sake will ultimately serve a dead end. So channel your urge for liberation into organized, disciplined change. Definitely avoid flouting rules just to assert independence. That is kind of coming from a place of ego then. Through this, we must build a sense of freedom. We can't just declare it for ourselves, unfortunately. Saturn's going to require that we put some work into it and that we structure it. So recognizing also when your resistance is being co-opted or redirected by fear-based forces. So again, that kind of reactivity is something to look out for as a red flag, even within our own selves. So being a reformer who's building new systems and not just a rebel who tears down old ones. And we can do that by really knowing what our cause is and structuring that vision and then following the steps of that structure that we're able to create for ourselves. Additionally, then cultivating independent resilience. So this is a time of really becoming our own foundation, embracing self-reliance, whether through skill building, entrepreneurship, personal responsibility. But on the other hand, do beware of isolating yourself in the name of freedom. So community shouldn't threaten our independence. It should really strengthen it throughout this time too. But it's about being unique and showing up as yourself authentically and serving your own personal, very strongly held values through that community too. So persevere through fear throughout this time too. Growth may feel delayed under this, but it is unfolding very deeply. So even though it may feel like there's delays, and there are, in a sense, this is a sense of delayed gratification, which can lead to a greater reward than just seeing results day after day. So really focusing then on creating a life that you can depend on and to be your own pioneer here, but not to the exclusion of having other people around you. You can be a pioneer and you can still have people around you. Also then build what outlasts you. So Saturn in Aries is not just about forging ahead. It's about building something lasting. So simplifying, stripping away unnecessary trappings is going to be really important. Foundation here is going to matter so much more than flair, especially with Neptune there. We're going to be so focused in and so tuned in on what is genuine and what's real, what is the core, the crux of an issue. And so people are going to be looking for that much more so than they will be looking for the surface level frills and flair that we've had as a major component of what it is that we're dealing with, even on cultural levels and social levels and things like this, because of the fact that both of these planets are moving out of Pisces. Always good then to focus with Saturn on long-term structures, institutions, frameworks, and systems, and in Aries, focusing on those which reflect your values. And do try to accept that gratification may be delayed, but your patience will be rewarded here. So don't just act during this time. Try to use that energy constructively. Try to use that energy to plant seeds that will wind up bearing fruit over time. Additionally, with the conjunction to Neptune here, trying to align to deeper cultural currents throughout this time. So this transit isn't happening in isolation. It's tapping into those deep collective patterns that we see with Neptune. And I did just do a couple videos on Neptune and Aries as well, which I will hopefully remember to link at this point in the video. But you may feel the pull of the wounded warrior archetype throughout this time. So honor that pain. Let it shape you into a guide rather than a cynic throughout this time. There will be some request for sacrificing aspects of life that aren't necessary and tapping much more into who you truly are and what it is that you truly want. So beware also during this time of moral panics, false authorities. Really, like I was saying, seek substance over appearance. That's also then going to tap you much more into what's going on culturally and in the collective unconscious this time, which is going to help you to succeed through this time. And remembering then that real change comes from depth and discipline and not spectacle. So again, try your best to live your values out loud for these years. Really let your authenticity be your resistance and embody the real and not just a specific role or position. So ultimately, Saturn in Aries demands maturity in motion. It's challenging us to our own independence, to refine our impulses, and to lead with both courage and conscience here, especially with Neptune involved. So if you rise to meet the lessons of this Saturn, you'll not only avoid its pitfalls, but you'll wind up emerging so much stronger, more grounded, and more truly yourself by the end of this transit, and really throughout this transit. What I love about Saturn in Aries is this idea of being the architect of your own life in these years. And I feel like that's a pretty good vision to hone in on for us all collectively during this time. But yeah, let's go ahead now and run through this sign by sign and see how this is going to be impacting all of us personally. But before we do, since I know that we tend to hit our timestamp and then go our own separate ways, I do just want to thank you all for being here, for spending this time with me. And if you enjoyed this video and you don't mind giving it a thumbs up, I greatly appreciate that. And consider sticking around for future videos by subscribing. I would love to have you here. And thank you so much to the members of this channel, Angel Niblock, Stacy Bergener, Michelle Howell, JJ, Deborah Keel Leavitt, Gary A., Startlingly True, Patrick McKenney, Jody Z., Anne Marie, Maria Cyril Hyro, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Rachel Windholtz, Lisa S., Aya, the Z-Man 1291, Long T Standing, the Nelson Cat Maya, Maggie, Connie DiMartino, Dolly Geese, Mango JT, B Love, Cupid's Cut, and Ellen McCormick Martins. Thank you all so much. Much love to you. And if you are interested in memberships, there is information in the description box below, along with personal readings and things like that. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and get into the sign by sign now. All right, so for Aries rising, we have Saturn and Aries taking place in your first house of yourself, your body, how you present yourself to the world, how you view yourself. And so this is bringing a strong sense of, as well as a requirement of a great deal of maturity on your part. It's calling for you to define and to structure your identity with a great deal of clarity and purpose, as well as a lot of independence. This isn't about concerning yourself too much with what other people think of you, Though your behavior should, of course, really be on the up and up when we have Saturn in the first house, it really is about cultivating your own personal identity, not based on something else. So personal responsibility will also wind up increasing during this time, and impulsiveness is just not going to work. You may find that there are more people that are dependent on you, and certainly feel free to ask yourself if that's something that you're comfortable with when it comes to certain people. So on a case-by-case basis, of course. And if you do need to say no, that is another thing that this transit will help you with, is establishing those personal boundaries. This is also very likely to set you up as a leader. And even if it feels uncomfortable, which hopefully it won't since you have Aries rising, but do understand if it does feel uncomfortable that you're coming across as a really strong authority figure during this time. Also having Neptune in this house, it is broadening your vision quite a bit, but it's also giving you a subtle influence that people may not be able to put their finger on, but having both of these there together is going to have you coming across as quite powerful, both on the level of, say, how you're showing up, but then additionally, what it is that you're getting done and so on and so forth in these very real 3D ways, but then also in the energy that you're emanating with Neptune there as well. So your physical and emotional endurance is also likely to be tested. So that's one of these reasons why it's going to be super important for you to build those sustainable habits throughout this period of time, because they're going to serve you super well to be able to understand what the structure of your day is looking like, what it is that's required of you, and the things that are not comfortable that you feel some sort of obligation to. Again, I would really just try to address those things so that you're not dealing with that as much moment to moment, because that's where this Saturn in Aries could go a little bit awry, is when you're having to react quickly to something in the moment and you're irritated about it. Those are the moments in which we don't choose our battles wisely. So especially for you, since this is in your first house, again, just trying to make sure that you are as much in charge of your own day as possible. And keeping in mind then that you're building a long-term foundation for how others see and respect you. You're gaining a sense of authority that's going to last for you much longer than just this transit here. And again, especially with Neptune here taking some cues from this Saturn, Neptune is going to be able to crystallize its visions, to crystallize the sense of influence that you're gaining throughout this time much better than had Saturn not joined this first house of yours pretty much at the same time as that Neptune. And that is to say, Neptune's going to be in this house of yours for about 14 years until 2039. So that is something to also keep in mind. If you're able then to build those structures, to build that long-term foundation for yourself, it's going to help that Neptune out as it's guiding you through various different paths and journeys throughout this 14 years of your life, which are going to be super significant for you. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aries rising. I hope that this transit treats you wonderfully, and thank you so much for being here. So for Taurus rising, we have Saturn in Aries transiting your 12th house of the subconscious, of matters of isolation, healing, spirituality, the transcendent. And so old fears, hidden patterns, they could wind up surfacing during this time, but do keep in mind that the purpose of this is for you to resolve these things. The more that you try to look away from those things, the more that you try to disown those things without confronting them and without dealing with them, the more resistant that they are likely to become toward you. So working through them, working with them, facing them with discipline is going to be really important. Especially, again, those patterns of conditioning, specifically, how you've become conditioned through your life to behave and what you've become conditioned to expect for yourself. This is really about owning that and defining it for yourself. But the way that you're able to do that is by looking at those patterns, looking at those fears, and resolving them with a sense of deep resolve and strength and discipline. This is also likely to be a period of a great deal of spiritual work, some solitude and inner restructuring, and this should feel somewhat comfortable. There may be moments where things feel a little bit heavier because clearly the work that's being done throughout this time is, again, greatly significant, but you're also going to be doing some really wonderful, effective, and yet transcendent work with both Saturn and Neptune here in your 12th house. So hopefully you are able to feel like, however weighty certain matters are that you are addressing here, that it's very, very deeply worth it and for a very long time to come. Again, matters of avoidance, secrecy, or escapism, these are unlikely to go over well as practices that you are engaging in. Avoidance in the sense of solitude would probably go over a bit better, but avoidance in the sense of intentionally distracting yourself or, again, trying to dissociate from the work that's being called for here, that's very unlikely to go over well. And then it could come out through some weird karmas developing. Any karmas that are there for you around these matters, avoidance, secrecy, escapism, those will also become clear to be able to work through and clean up, which hopefully should make you so much more effective then. This is also a really wonderful time to create those spiritual or emotional boundaries. So if you feel like your spirituality is something you don't necessarily want to share with others during this time, that would make some sense, but I wouldn't feel bad about that, certainly. Don't let others guilt you into letting them in more than you're comfortable with. Really check in on your emotional boundaries and feel if they are getting irritated. And it would feel like a sense of underlying or subconscious irritation that might feel like it's coming from nowhere, but it's actually the result of a trigger to your emotional boundaries. So definitely worth keeping that in mind. And then you'll have those boundaries going forward to utilize as well. That's one thing Saturn in Aries is going to be so excellent at, is saying no and establishing those boundaries. So this is also the house of dreams and intuition. And so this could become major structured tools for growth rather than just whimsy, rather than sowing some sense of anxiety or chaos of like, this was my plan, but now I'm feeling this way. And so what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? If you are able to structure, tapping into dreams, writing those down, requesting that matters be made clear to you in your dreams, you're going to have Neptune here as well for about 14 years. And so you should be becoming more and more attuned to what those dreams are trying to say to you throughout this whole broader period of time. And structuring those now while you have Saturn in that house too is going to be very fruitful. Also creating structure around your intuition. So possibly even creating specifically a daily practice of utilizing your intuition, checking in on your body, how it's feeling, even scrying or taking time to study divination, to study astrology, things like this. That's going to be super helpful to you going forward, especially because this period of time is likely to have you taking super seriously spirituality and your spiritual connection. So it's just such a wonderful time to tap into then structuring what you're taking very seriously. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus rising. So I hope that this transit treats you very well, and thank you so much for being here. So for Gemini rising, we have Saturn in Aries transiting your 11th house of friends, community, goals, dreams, hopes, aspirations. So friendships and networks are going to be redefined around this period of time. Definitely loyalty and maturity will matter, but this is you taking much more seriously who it is that you're connecting to, taking that network much more seriously and putting a lot of effort into that. So it will be important to understand that some of those connections, and really all of them as a whole, will be requiring a lot more effort throughout this time. This may at times feel heavy. Saturn, especially Saturn in Aries, it can make us not like certain things. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of a push and pull internally about that socializing and that social network requirement, basically, that goes along with this transit, of then also sometimes feeling highly introverted and like you don't want to be responsible for others. The fact of the matter with this transit is that you will be responsible for others. So perhaps best to really embrace the gifts of that and the long-term rewards of that than to try and resist that. One thing I would definitely expect from Saturn transiting a certain area, if you're trying, quote unquote, intentionally to not do the work or to not deal with that area of life, is that it will point out to you that you have to deal with it regardless. So better to do it on your own terms than for Saturn to teach you some sort of a lesson around avoiding people, being away, to sidestep the rewards of having a community network around you while still not serving to completely protect you from the responsibilities that you have to other people. So you may, for instance, try and cut yourself off in some ways and then have neighbors become a bit of an issue where it's like I'm minding my own business and somehow other people are still my problem. So it's going to be a bit of a push and pull, but I would definitely recommend embracing it because then you'll get the rewards of it too. Also, very likely that you're going to be taking on a group leadership role, and opportunities should really be arising around this time. But again, it's going to require a huge amount of responsibility, maturity, patience, and really then rising to that occasion, rising to that role. It won't be easy necessarily, certainly not the whole time, but when Saturn comes through, it does also help us to mature. It will help us to take on the role that we're supposed to be taking on. So even if we are called to be more responsible for others, Saturn itself will also be helping you to cultivate the traits, the confidence, the authority within yourself that you may be a little bit nervous. Do I have this as we're going into this transit? If you're nervous about that, do know that the Saturn's going to be helping you out with it the whole time. But then additionally, certainly by the end of this transit, you're going to have it in spades. Saturn here is also going to have you clarifying your long-term aspirations and goals. So if you've been up in the air about certain things, especially in the couple of months that we've had Neptune in this area, if you've become a little bit less clear about where it is that you're going or what it is that you're doing, Saturn coming into this place is going to have you getting a lot more serious about clarifying and structuring those goals of yours. Laying out a plan to go after that and then following all those steps. So some social ties will fall away as well. And ultimately, this is to bring in people who are much more long-lasting. You're likely to make some very long-term friends with Saturn in this house. And so building those relationships, those long-term relationships on substance, rather than just trying to collect people, so to say, is going to be really important too. And Saturn can come through and it can take some things away wherever it is. Usually, again, it's doing that in order to create space for something that's more lasting and that's more serious and real. But it's highly likely that one of the ways it's going to do this for you is to close off some superficial relationships and to really discourage you from over expanding your network such that it becomes less effective, whatever effective might mean to you. Also, with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction here, this is a highly social, cultural, political kind of conjunction. And the 11th house having to do with community, it has to do with society, the way that that functions. And you're going to have some really strong ideals and visions around how that should be structured in order to benefit more people. And so it's highly, highly likely that you'll either be getting involved in some sort of a spiritual group along these lines or some sort of an activist role along these lines too. So collective efforts will wind up then requiring some structured involvement on your part too. And that may be one of the areas where you're very likely to assume a leadership role. But I would highly recommend, if this is something that you've thought about doing but you haven't quite done yet, allowing for this Saturn to do that kind of work is really wonderful as a way of hopefully avoiding some of the complications that could arise from a Saturn in Aries in your 11th house that maybe you're not utilizing as much as you could be. So I would definitely recommend getting involved with groups, but not groups on a superficial level. This isn't just about networking for the sake of your career. You can network for the sake of long-term goals effectively. You can network for the sake of shared values. And you can network for the sake of trying to accomplish something together. So even as you are taking on more responsibility, perhaps in a working position, then trying to branch out and trying to perhaps even help a company to branch out in order to create a firmer, broader foundation socially for whatever group or organization or institution it is that you're leading. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Gemini rising. So I hope that this transit treats you very well. And thank you so much for being here. Okay, so for Cancer rising, we have Saturn in Aries transiting your 10th house. This is the house of your career, reputation, authority, your position, your role in life, how it is that you show up out in the wider world. And so career shifts during this time are likely to really require you to take much more control over your public role. With Aries here, it's likely that you're going to feel pretty driven, and if not driven, almost forced to be a lot more independent in your role. You may even have a sense of wanting to, or having your hand forced to go fully independent where you're working for yourself, and then needing to develop the authority of self, the confidence in yourself to take on that role and to wear it well, basically. What's nice about having Saturn here is that it's going to help you a lot to claim that for yourself, to insist upon that for yourself. So the position that you'll be put in with this Saturn in Aries is going to call on you to mature and to assume greater responsibility. You may find that the tasks that you're required to do are more, and this may be a reflection of if a lot of people are needing to be onboarded, but you are experienced with something, needing to put up with that kind of a situation where more is expected of you. I would highly recommend following through on that and trying not to get too frustrated about that, because that is precisely the kind of a thing that Saturn is going to end up rewarding ultimately. On occasion, some authority figures may challenge you. It's not guaranteed to be the case, but it may be some people here and there. What's much more likely is that you will become an authority figure throughout this time, and possibly repeatedly, where there could be repeated promotions where you're taking on more and more responsibility due to the strength of your expertise and the strength of your experience. Also then, if you have been kind of trying to get by or trying to find yourself to the next step, things like this is going to have you in a position to where you're in a long-term career, and it's not just about the short term trying to pay the bills or trying to save some money, things like this. This is much more long-term in terms of developing your legacy, your reputation, what it is that you're known for. Having Neptune here too is going to help you to envision these things. It's going to also offer a subtle authoritative influence for you to also rely on, to where it's not just that you're showing up as an authority. It's not just that you're showing up as competent and experienced. It's also that you have this energy of authority that you're emanating. So while this is going to make you quite good at structuring things, especially your day, that is one thing that I would highly recommend, is to try and get very methodical about your work, as it's likely that you're able to simplify the living heck out of it with Saturn in Aries in your 10th house. And I wouldn't even necessarily be shy about not telling everyone that that's something that you're doing, where people may be like, wow, how are you able to do all of this? And you may just kind of laugh and be like, honestly, I feel like I could probably handle like double the workload, but I'm not going to tell you that. So that's something that's very, very likely to come up for you. I will say I'm a Gemini rising, and so I just went through this transit of the co-presence of Saturn and Neptune in my 10th house. And granted, that was in Pisces, but it's a similar vibe to have both of them there. And not that I would encourage this, but I remember that day one, the day that it went in, and I wasn't even thinking about it at the time, but I just kind of surprised a lot of people by pivoting pretty hard in my working life. And it just felt really, really right. And there were moments where I asked myself, was that really the best idea? But it just kind of kept building and building and building to a greater sense of authority, as well as a level of responsibility. That was one of the things that I was frustrated with, was that it was definitely below my responsibility level. And so I had to leave in order to find that responsibility that I knew I was capable of taking on. Additionally, I wound up then being offered a crazy, crazy promotion where I would have been hopping quite a few levels, and weirdly quickly, because I had only been with that company for about 6 months. But then the company wound up suddenly going under and forcing me then to go all in full time as an astrologer. And so this is a very standard Saturn in your 10th house kind of a situation where the responsibility grows and grows and grows. And it's something that you embrace. And by doing your work well, regardless of whether you find it difficult, regardless of whether you find it boring, it has some real rewards. But also, there's likely a point that you would get to where you're going to start to really desire to be much more independent and to just follow your own rules, because you have developed the sense of responsibility and maturity such that you're able to drive your own action, to be your own manager, so to say. So even if you already hold a role like that for yourself, it's going to become simplified and streamlined throughout this period of time to where you're carrying that much more easily. But yeah, it's one of the better transits to have Saturn running through your 10th house, because it's an area of life that does super well with structure. So I would certainly recommend taking advantage of it. It was rather endlessly rewarding for me, and definitely taught me that I was capable of a huge amount more than I was giving myself credit for. So yeah, I hope that this transit treats you very well, and thank you so much for being here. So for Leo rising, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 9th house of your personal beliefs, of travel and higher education. This to me is where one's worldview really shows up. And so this is going to have you really rethinking that worldview, rethinking your philosophies. And are they based on any sort of old or outdated attachments? Is there anything superfluous to these philosophies? Are you able to simplify them? Are you able to really name some of these things that truly resonate with you? Look at them for what they are and see how your own sense of lived truth is reflected in those philosophies that you carry, the values that you carry. This is likely to have you much, much, much more serious about delving into these areas. So even if this is a major sense of interest for you, an area of interest is humanities and things like this, you're likely to get even more serious about it and even more authoritative then about it. But if it's an area that you haven't gone into a whole lot, philosophy, spirituality, culture, politics, even law and matters like this, basically anything that falls under the category of humanities, it's likely to be nagging at you to learn more about this, to experience more of this. And so you may find yourself studying either from books or from courses. And if you do feel an urge to take a course, I would highly, highly recommend it, because the more structured that you can be in your learning, the better off that the Saturn is going to be feeling, and the more work that you're able to give it to do so that it doesn't express itself in kind of weird ways of feeling maybe philosophically restricted or something like this. So travel and education during this time may experience some delays, but again, there's going to be that really long-term growth and personal development through engaging in those things. So I would not use Saturn in your 9th as any sort of an excuse to not travel. Yes, there may be some little weird experiences of delays or running into some authority figures, things like that. For one thing, just make sure your documents are all super correct if you are traveling outside of a country or something. Make sure that you have everything clear if you're going to be taking a course. But other than that procedural stuff, I would highly recommend engaging in both of those things as much as you're able to. Also, through this time, you're going to be put into positions where you need to live by your principles and not just preach them to others. And so when those moments arise, I would highly recommend taking them as tests, recognizing them as tests and trying to live up to that standard. And through this process of these coming couple of years, then that's going to become easier and easier for you, which is in turn going to make you feel much more authentic in your belief, but then also much more authentic in yourself and in your behavior, and much more clear on, this is how I genuinely react to a given situation. Then it's less conditioned on how you're feeling in any given moment, and it's then able to be firmly established with a strong foundation on what your values truly are. You may find yourself publishing or engaging with legal systems in some way. That would also be a pretty standard thing to expect with this kind of a transit. And again, when it comes to both of those, structure and discipline are going to serve you super well. I would not cut any corners along the way, but as long as you do that, it's likely to go very well for you. So this, again, if you're considering publishing, I would recommend utilizing this to that end, especially if it is your first time publishing and you are not so intensely worried about reach, but you're focused more on getting it done and doing it correctly, understanding and learning the process of publishing. And this can be blog or on YouTube or a book or anything like that, even a newsletter or something like that if you're wanting to put that out. This is going to help you a lot to learn the ropes with that. And additionally, depending on what other transits were going on at the time of publishing, it could also offer you a sense of authority or a position or people perceiving you as an authority because you've published something. And yeah, ultimately then throughout this period of time, faith, values, perspectives, philosophies, your worldview, that's really being rebuilt on a foundation that's based on experience and accountability. So holding yourself to the same standards as others and knowing deeply enough your own values to be able to live them rather than to just preach them. And to really have that be a part of your lived experience. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Leo rising. It's a pretty wonderful place to have both of these planets working together for you. So I hope that this transit treats you very well. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Virgo rising, Saturn in Aries is transiting through your 8th house of shared resources, dependencies, power, transformation, emotional connections. So there's likely to be some really important lessons here around shared resources, around trust, control, around dependencies, and how those can be created, how sometimes they get a bit out of balance. And so it's going to be really paramount to make sure that those relationships of yours are in some form of balance, that there isn't one party or another that feels controlled or that feels like someone else has power over them. If you're finding yourself in that position with this transit coming up, I would really recommend not putting off any longer than absolutely necessary, addressing that for yourself and trying to become less and less dependent on someone else. And I do have to say, if you don't, and this is going to sound like a bit of a threat, but it is Saturn we're dealing with here. If you don't, Saturn's likely to force your hand. That's the thing. And by likely, I mean guaranteed. So best to kind of get on top of that if you're in a complicated situation like that. Now, if you're not, then this can be a period of time to where you're really working on developing trust. If that is something that you have trouble depending on others, that you have trouble creating those interdependent relationships with people, Saturn, especially with Neptune also here, is likely to have you looking at that differently, or at least able to look at that differently, to where it doesn't feel as unnatural, especially if it's a matter of not wanting for others to be dependent upon you. I totally get that, but this kind of a transit can definitely put you along the path of someone who will need your help in some way, and it would be really wonderful if you're able to show up for them. You'd likely receive some pretty strong rewards from that if you're able to show up in integrity. You may also then, this doesn't just have to be material resources. So offering then emotional, or even the resource of like counseling, like psychological support for other people, can be a really wonderful way to exercise this transit. Studying psychology is another way that I would highly, highly, highly recommend utilizing this transit. This, for me, it was when it was in Capricorn, but when Saturn came through my 8th house, I thought that I understood psychology decently well. This is when I went all in, and I basically studied nothing but psychology for about 2 years. And that was one of the reasons why I now look back on that, even though it was a bit of a complicated period of time, as one of the most significant and most rewarding periods of my life, because I put that effort and energy into understanding better psychology, and especially the psychological nature of other people in the 8th house there. So yeah, also throughout this time, emotional and psychological transformation and disciplined introspection. So going into those emotions, going into any of those trust issues or dependency issues or things like that that you may have, again, regardless of whether it is a codependency thing or like an anti-dependency thing, just trying to bring that into balance pretty much throughout this time is going to be the best way to go about this, and to become disciplined and structured and intent upon, okay, I'm going to think this area of my life through much more seriously than usual in these couple of years. If you have any debts that need to be sorted out, it would be really, really great for you to do that willingly and proactively with this transit. This can have you really getting on top of it, getting something paid off, and no longer having to worry about it anymore, and feeling super accomplished through doing that. But also then when it comes to questions of like karmic debts or emotional debts that you have with other people, if something is out of balance, again, with all of this, it's all about bringing that into balance. The dependencies, the debts, and those karmic connections as well, to basically bring that to a zero balance, so to say, and then feel very accomplished for that as well. One thing also that the Saturn in Aries is going to help you with immensely is Saturn in Aries is really great at saying no. And so if you need to establish any boundaries, especially when it comes to deep relationships or commitments or things like this, and especially when it has to do with emotional or mental or psychological boundaries, as sometimes people, I'm sure we all know, can trample upon those at times. And sometimes we're like, well, it's not costing me any money, so whatever, I'm just going to brush it under the rug. This wouldn't really be the time to brush it under the rug. Yeah, this might, in a negative sense, have you react to that sometimes in a very strong way and a very irritable way. So if you can tune into, if you're feeling irritability, maybe not necessarily acting in those moments, but then coming back to what has made you feel irritated and address that then at the root. And it's probably going to be a matter of boundaries and feeling like you haven't been properly respected in a specific situation. Also very likely to have some power struggles surface during this time. This may be, again, this could totally be something that you've seen, that you've experienced for a while, and now it's just getting to a point where you need to address it. Again, fortunately, Saturn in Aries is going to help you out a lot in doing that. But I'll say it again, this is all about bringing things to zero. So when we get reactive about power struggles, often our minds, our monkey mind, so to say, will look at that as a situation of there's a debt here to me in terms of respect or a certain situation. And there can be this reaction of then trying to shift the power balance in the opposite direction rather than trying to address the fact that there's an imbalance that's there. So that's what that's what I mean by ethically. Like I would really try to bring that to zero. Deal with these things straight ethically, really as above board as possible. And then by the end of it, this should have you much more adept when it comes to things like red flags. It should have you much more able to be self-reliant, but still trust others and still be able to open up to others. If you have any debts, by the end of this, you should be much, much, much more clear about that. If not having already wrapped it up, being on some sort of a plan that's working in order to get you there pretty quickly. And then also when it comes to power struggles, by the end of this, not feeling the need to protect yourself, to get into that kind of fight or flight mode when you have someone challenging you. But then hopefully by the end of this, Saturn will have taught you to stand on your own 2 feet, regardless of what the situation is, to trust that you will stand up and therefore not needing to feel fear when someone challenges you, therefore not getting into that fight or flight mode because you're not in fear, even if someone does challenge you. So yeah, it's not necessarily the most lighthearted of transits, but I do have to say one of the most rewarding that I've personally experienced. And I've spoken to a lot of, I'm a Gemini rising, so this happened for me around the COVID time. And I've spoken to a lot of Gemini risings whenever I talk to them about that period of time. And they do speak to, yeah, there were weird complications of power dynamics and learning about people being psychologically not as well as one would expect. But with everyone that I've spoken to, they, like me, have felt I wouldn't trade it for anything because it was such a wonderfully informative experience to go through. So I hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Libra rising, we have Saturn and Aries transiting through your 7th house of relationships, contracts, partnerships. So partnerships will be tested under this period of time. Only those of a great deal of substance, longevity, staying power, maturity, only those will last these tests when it comes to your close and personal relationships. So if you are in a partnership that's a little bit more lighthearted, during this time, it's likely to face that kind of a pressure of, is this going to go away or is it going to deepen and become more long-term? So that's really the pressure that this winds up bringing is it going to last? And if not, then Saturn tends to push it away. You may also find yourself attracted to or attracting in much more serious or older partners. You may be looking for less frivolous fun in relationships, but then rather looking at what a relationship actually means and how it is that people can show up for each other, and then looking for that rather than just looking for a specific type of appearance or a specific characteristic or something that's a little bit more superficial. This isn't going to be attracted to superficial traits and characteristics and appearances and things like this, especially with Neptune also here. The two of these together are focused so hard on what is real, what is deeply, genuinely real, not just on the material basis, but what feels very real, what genuinely gives you a sense of security and comfort within a relationship, what genuinely feels right. And so the connections that you make under this kind of an influence are likely to be super long-term and karmic. If someone significant comes into your life, it's probably going to be for a while. And you'll probably go through some things with each other, but hopefully will then show up for each other. And with Neptune here as well, then also sympathize with and understand each other and get where you're coming from and be able to, again, lift each other up if moments of difficulty arise for either one of you or both of you together. And having that patience then also with relationships is another thing that this would really call for. Hopefully, this also won't come out sometimes in a negative sense as feeling the need to be in a relationship. Again, this isn't going to do well with a frivolous relationship. So if you feel an urge, almost a fear-based urge to get into a relationship because of maybe fear of being alone or something like this, I would do your best to try and resist those urges, because those relationships aren't going to go over well, and they may actually cause a lot of challenge and difficulty with the Saturn here, because then Saturn's going to look at the situation and say, okay, clearly this person needs some sort of a lesson around relationships. So we don't want to invite that in too much. So ultimately then redefining what it is that you really want from those one-on-one connections. What type of commitment you are genuinely comfortable with making. You yourself, not just what's the standard rate at which a relationship develops, but what are you genuinely, authentically, really comfortable with? What is someone else genuinely, authentically, really comfortable with? You're likely to run into a lot of fundamentally authentic people around this time, and even people who can be a bit challenging in their own right, but it's likely to be, again, very rewarding, those connections. Also, when it comes to any sort of legal or business partnerships, there is an absolute necessity to be super clear, very structured, dotting all of the I's, crossing all of the T's, and making sure that that is just abundantly clear. To have both Neptune and Saturn here, that could go very awry if there is any sort of ambiguity. So don't worry about pestering someone else about making sure that everything is in writing. That is ultimately what you should be doing with a transit like this. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra rising. So I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. Right, so for Scorpio rising, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 6th house of health, work, and daily routines. This is not too bad a place to have this taking place, because it should help you to really become very disciplined when it comes to your routine. So your daily habits will require a great deal of structuring, as well as a great deal of discipline and showing up with a solid work ethic, with a solid commitment to getting things done, basically day to day. Saturn's going to really require that of you, but it will also then help you with that, to help you to get super structured and very reliable when it comes to accomplishing your tasks in a specific period of time. Now, I would say if you are actively participating in this, which I would highly recommend, of restructuring your day, disciplining yourself, trying to set certain parameters, I would plan for things to take a little bit longer than usual, because Saturn can slow things down a bit. And you naturally have Aries in this house, so you'll naturally have a bit of a lack of patience when it comes to how long it takes for something to be done, in part because for you personally, you're likely to be much more capable of getting things done more quickly than other people. But I would try to be easy also on yourself around this time. Expect things to take longer. Don't be hard on yourself about that. This is also likely to increase the amount of work that you're responsible for, so your workload really increasing. Try to create some boundaries when it comes to that. One thing that Saturn in Aries is good at doing is saying no when it needs to, certainly. But on the other hand, whenever we're experiencing a Saturn transit anywhere in our chart, we do really need to put in good, clean work. So I would try your best to rise to the occasion of any workload increases that you're seeing, but do know your limits, because that productivity is needing to be sustainable. And if it's not, then that's where Saturn can get very out of balance and can cause things to go a bit awry. So try to make sure that things are sustainable, but that you're putting in that good effort. Not too little, not too much, basically. We're really going to be looking for balance when it comes to all of these Saturn in Aries transits. You may also find yourself creating a new health or workout routine or something like this. So structuring and actualizing and going after a very specific health regimen is very recommended with a transit like this. Saturn in this house can cause some complications. So I also wouldn't overlook anything that seems to be concerning you, especially with Neptune here. You should have an intuitive sense of your health, your well-being. And so if you feel like something is just a bit off, I would definitely recommend going and getting it checked out if that's an option for you. Otherwise, maybe just working with AI to try to eliminate some possibilities and things like this. But yeah, really structuring, limiting. You may find that, for instance, an elimination diet of some sort does you really well during this time to detox. Setting limits with certain things as well, whether it be treats or substances or things like this. If you do need to do any sort of a cessation thing, like if you're a smoker and you want to not be, or something along these lines, if you're wanting to give something up, having Saturn come through this house is very, very helpful with that. And then again, any sort of new routines around your health and well-being are very well supported by having Saturn coming through that area. This is also a house associated with being of service. So it's a question of what you feel is worth fighting for. And often that'll be either a cause or something outside of yourself that you're needing to serve. And you're asked with this transit to do so without resentment and to refine your approach to serving others and your comfort with being in that kind of a role. That might not always be super easy. It's likely, though, to be the most rewarding thing to come out of the Saturn in Aries here in your 6th house. Because there will be occasions where this Saturn in Aries is going to present itself as a sense of irritability. And so it'll be best to try not to let that come out at an inopportune time for sure. But additionally, if you're able to get at the root of that, what that resentment is, maybe there's a boundary that you do need to set in order to get yourself more comfortable with being able to serve without then feeling like you're being taken advantage of, basically. This Saturn in this area, especially with Neptune there too, will be helping a lot with specifically that issue. And yeah, really any systematizing, any sort of ritualizing of the work that you do of your day, of your life, basically, that you're able to do, it's really going to support you physically, mentally, emotionally. And when it comes to then your productivity, basically your energy levels. This is one of the cooler places to have Saturn again, because it responds well, this area of our lives, to structure. And so this should be really primarily a helpful transit, but there are just those little things to keep in mind, especially when it comes to health stuff. Being proactive will be great because then you're utilizing that Saturn, and it is then much less likely to come out in a complicated way that's a little bit outside of your control, where you're then trying to catch up to maybe a health concern or something that gets out of your hands. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio rising. So I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Sagittarius rising, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 5th house. So this is the house of your personal creativity, your expression, your children. We also often see romantic relationships in this house. So with Saturn here, you're getting much more serious about your creativity. I actually really love the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in this house, because Neptune is really going to be working on that muse of yours, the inspiration. It's going to be giving you that creative vision, that dream or ideal in your mind that you want to see come into form. So if you are an artist or a creative type of any sort, this is going to be extraordinarily helpful to that, to bringing into form that ideal, that image, to structure that expression of yours. If you're not yet a creative type, I would be quite surprised if by the end of this you don't become so. because you're going to be working with a relatively serious urge here, almost a compulsion in this area of your life. So you may express this through hobbies or other types of self-expressive outlets that aren't necessarily about creating something, but rather about enjoying things. This is the house of joy. And so you're incorporating that with Saturn here. You're incorporating that in a much more serious way into your life. You're putting more effort and energy and time into those things that you really enjoy and taking seriously the fact that life is to be enjoyed. And yet, what's funny about this transit is that fleeting things are not quite as satisfactory. So when it comes to flings, when it comes to lighthearted relationships, those aren't quite as satisfying. There's a lot of depth in this house with Saturn and Neptune coming through here. And so romantic relationships are likely to become much more in depth, much more serious, and much less based on superficial qualities or appearances or things like this. It's much more about the soul level feeling towards someone. And that then becomes something of a requirement then for a romantic relationship to feel right and to feel genuinely enjoyable. Additionally, if you have children, this is you putting a lot more time and effort and energy into your responsibilities as a parent. These are likely then to increase. So you may feel that as a parent, there's more on your plate. Your connection too with your children is likely to deepen and become a lot more serious. Also, when it comes to your expression, your personal expression, you're doing that much more authentically then. Again, the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune is all about what is truly real on multiple different levels. So Saturn's going to look at what's real in terms of 3D concerns. Neptune is going to look at what is the nature of reality in this kind of transcendent perspective. And so what type of expression, how is it that being yourself, how is it that expressing yourself authentically can serve you extraordinarily well in order to satisfy the muse, in order to satisfy your physical material needs, as well as in order to satisfy yourself on a spiritual or soul level. You'll be needing to basically answer for all of these different aspects of yourself when it comes to your expression. And so naturally then taking that very seriously, becoming quite disciplined and structured about thinking that through and figuring out how all of these different parts of your life slot into place in order to make it much more satisfying and joyful and fulfilling. You also then have the ability to derive an intense sense of satisfaction from perseverance, from real effort that is put into any sort of joyful pursuits. So be they, again, expressive or crafty or hobbies, even sport and things like that show up in this house. Be it through parenting as best as you possibly can. The effort that you put into this area of your life, it's not like it's necessarily sucking the joy out of it. It's not making it serious in that sense. It's making it more serious in the sense of feeling a very strong urge to define yourself by this, to define yourself through what it is that you enjoy. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Sagittarius rising. It's one of the cooler transits. You kind of can't go wrong with a fifth house transit. So I hope that it treats you wonderfully. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Capricorn rising, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your fourth house of home, family, roots, your core. And so this is likely to increase your responsibilities at home. You may be taking your home life or your family life much more seriously throughout this period of time. So within the home, this could be desiring to invest in property, desiring to upgrade your property, even learning how to do certain DIY things around your home yourself, but feeling a sense of responsibility over that area of your life, the physical home. This could absolutely come through as some more difficulties along those lines. So part of the reason why you might be doing some DIY stuff around home would be there could be some things that are breaking that you're having to deal with. But with a Saturn transit, typically you learn something through the process. So for instance, if you have some issue arise with pipes or something, then you could wind up then learning how to diagnose those things or even how to replace certain pipes. This could also be you choosing to have a family and pursuing that, and therefore taking a greater sense of responsibility over the concept of family. Or you could be taking some members of your family in or taking more responsibility over their affairs. You may even be looking at those ancestral patterns and wanting to dig those up, wanting to address those. With both Saturn and Neptune here, you may be really wanting to rewrite some narratives of the past and to reconstruct those in a healthier way, basically. Reconstruct those along more independent or individual lines of your own so that they're able to serve you better going forward. And also with both of these in Aries here, then redefining your concept of home intentionally, redefining your sense of family. So you may be doing this. If you have had struggles with family or something like this, you may be really intentionally deciding, I'm going to redefine what family is to me. I need to connect with people that I feel like I have these lifelong connections to, but it's just not working in my ancestral family. And you may even be doing this on multiple fronts. So, for instance, if there's been a specific way that your family has done things and it's just not working for you around this time. For instance, perhaps especially around a living situation. So perhaps parents would disapprove of some kind of a living situation that is working for you or that you're finding is going to be working for you. And yet you're deciding to go with it anyway because it's about what's right for you during this time with these in Aries here. So ultimately then building those stronger emotional foundations in yourself, in your own core, and being able to rely very, very, very fundamentally and very deeply on yourself. And perhaps out of a sense of necessity with sometimes domestic life feeling a bit restrictive, feeling even a little bit unclear, or feeling like somehow it's both unclear and restrictive. So if there is a family situation that really has seemed probably for a while like it's untenable, like it's unsustainable, I would not be surprised to see something like that come apart at the seams under this kind of pressure. But ultimately, then what this is calling for you to do is to restructure that, to recrystallize that in a form that is sustainable for you and that does make you feel very secure in yourself going forward. Even if that means that you have to move to a different place to gain a greater sense of independence, either from a friend group or from family, from some kind of a relationship. Any changes that you're needing to make along these lines, they are called for. They're not demanded in the sense of if everything's fine with your family, don't just feel the need because these are here to uproot and change everything. But if you are really feeling those urges come up, it's probably pointing to something that Saturn and Neptune are trying to clarify to you around your home, your family. And if that's feeling restrictive, these two are not really going to hold space for that. And if you try to sweep those things under the rug, it's unlikely to work. It's likely if you do that this is going to come out in some kind of a different way where your hand could be forced. So I really wouldn't ignore those kinds of things arising. They're really there to help you, to get you on a more stable ground. And then to lay that groundwork for stability, for that sense of belonging, which is ultimately what these two are going to be bringing to you. And it may just come through a sense of feeling like your role is being more recognized, but in a way within your family, perhaps, but in a way that requires you to take on more responsibility. So it doesn't necessarily need to be this huge, weighty, heavy thing, but it might be. And if it is, I wouldn't look at it as being perhaps even quote unquote more destabilized than you already were, but rather if something does destabilize along these lines of your home, your family, your living situation, even just again within your own core, it's only doing that to point out to you that there's already an issue there that's calling to be addressed. So the sooner then that you can not resist that call to address it, the sooner that you're able to look at it and try to answer those questions for yourself, ultimately the better with this transit here. And by the end of it, you should be feeling much more stable and like you're on a much stronger foundation ultimately. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn rising. So I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. All right, for Aquarius rising, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your third house of communications, the local space, your community, siblings, peers. So you'll be learning throughout the coming couple of years how to communicate with greater authority, how to speak with more purpose through experience throughout this time. So there may be certain encounters that you have with people that challenge you along those lines. People pushing your buttons, even people where it seems like you're just talking past them, like you're talking to a wall or something. And this is ultimately to get you to carry that authority more in your voice, to speak with greater purpose and not to react or to respond too hastily to challenges like that. Otherwise, your relationships with your community as well are going to be undergoing a maturation process. So you'll be taking those connections much more seriously. You may even be called to get involved in some community effort, especially with Neptune here as well. This is really speaking to your social, emotional, spiritual values and wanting to enact those in your local community, especially when it comes to communicating about issues that people are having, making sure that people are aware of those things. So I wouldn't be surprised to see you getting involved in some kind of activism or community involvement. You may also need to establish greater boundaries along these lines too. So perhaps with siblings, but with community generally speaking. So with neighbors or even with friends at times, this can require, for instance, when people are texting you, do they somehow expect a quick response? Establishing boundaries along those lines would be a really great way to utilize this transit if you feel some kind of pressure to respond to people, to continually be communicating with people on their terms. This would also be a really wonderful time to take a class or to learn some sort of skill or topic. I'm sure you'll be drawn to other types of learning activities like books that seem to stand out or learning things on YouTube. You'll be taking your experience with media a lot more seriously as well. So perhaps either less for entertainment or even when you are engaging with entertainment media, with this Neptune in your third house, being a little bit more critical or having a bit more refined of a lens through which you perceive of media. You may even be a little bit more critical of journalistic outlets and things like this, and really questioning some of the narratives that they're putting out. You may also find yourself in something of an authority position when it comes to your speaking, so needing to speak for some kind of a cause, to be responsible for communications. And you may or may not love this, but with this transit, you should be doing this rather well. And yeah, any sort of mental discipline, if you are able to better structure your day or to better structure, if you're already learning about something, to create more structure around that learning process, even if you're doing it independently, which may well be the case with this in Aries. But even when it comes to journaling, social media, the topics that you speak about with people, both the content, the topics, the way that you go about it, and how you come off is much more serious. And you could absolutely find yourself even in a teaching position with Saturn and Neptune here. That is Saturn in the third, a pretty strong indicator of teaching as well. You could even run across a really wonderful mentor in these coming years with Saturn in your third house, someone who really takes you under their wing and serves as basically an authority figure to you to be able to learn something. One thing I would definitely recommend is to be careful about speeding or any sort of recklessness when it comes to transportation and travel and things like this. So you're much more likely with this alignment to get pulled over, but also to have worse come from that. So I would be very careful with driving and things of that nature pretty much until 2028. Not that you shouldn't go out and shouldn't drive, but it's specifically the speed of Aries that could get you into trouble. So just make sure that you're not going too crazy with that. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aquarius rising. So I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for being here. Okay, so for Pisces rising, we have Saturn and Aries transiting through your second house of personal finances, income, resources, self-worth, values, and your sense of security and stability, both material and emotional. So it's very likely that in this period of time, you're going to want to have a more independent source of income or resources. You may want to do this through investments, through entrepreneurship, through tapping into your savings to turn it around so that you can make a greater sense of security from whatever assets you already have. And you'll likely be very willing to put a lot of time and effort and energy into creating this sense of greater freedom for yourself through having a lot of independent control over your resources. And this may be spurred on by some kind of financial reality check. So if something winds up arising, you may, I don't want to scare you, but you may even have your hand a bit forced in going independent, where a working situation or an income source can become somewhat unsustainable, even if it's on an emotional level, like you just don't like to do something anymore. That can become more and more of a concern until you make a decision to go more independent. But of course, this requires a great deal more responsibility and that long-term planning, as well as the sacrifice of short-term gratification for that long-term plan, that long-term vision that you have for not just your finances and your money, because it's not really ultimately about that. It's about freedom and independence. And so having a really long-term vision for that and wanting really to run with that. You may have even had some inklings of this, particularly since Neptune went into this house in the end of March. So then being able to really crystallize your life around your own values. And that's some of the freedom that this connection here is going to be seeking for you. So being able to have some income or a greater sense of resources available to you via the means of what it is that you value. So again, a lot of this is really pointing to questions of investments or entrepreneurship, so that you're able to satisfy your values while also satisfying your material and emotional and spiritual needs, all through the same source, and that source being really you ultimately, and how you show up, much less than dependent on how other people show up, because that's what this is going to want to try to avoid. This will also be very supportive of your sense of self-worth and independence. So not feeling the need to base your self-worth on how you feel that other people perceive you, but rather on a sense of deeply ingrained trust in yourself. And that'll take some effort. Saturn usually requires effort for the rewards that it offers, but that is very much available to you to be able to redefine narratives around your value, especially if that's been something that you tend to base upon either what it is that you are to other people, which is a very Piscean thing to do, or if it's based on the judgments of others. This is going to have you trusting your own judgments a lot more, especially by the end of it, but throughout it, it should help you along those lines if you're willing to try and grab onto that and work on that. And yeah, again, the security here, material and emotional security, come from delayed gratification, but also from the trust that you can develop in yourself to delay gratification. So once it is that you feel, and maybe you're already an entrepreneur, but this is just having you take the financial aspect of that to another level through trusting more and more and more in yourself. So this could even be a matter of becoming a little bit less materialistic, especially about material items. You'll still want to have some really wonderful experiences, but when it comes to actual physical things, questioning as to whether you really need to perhaps update those things as much as you used to. Because you're not really going to feel the need to keep up with the Joneses, you're defining this much more just based on your own values and what it is that you personally value. And then only being really willing to put resources into that which increases your quality of life, that which speaks directly to what you value. So ultimately, in either of these ways, it is beneficial long-term to your security, your stability, your resources, possibly even your income. It may, though, require some short-term sacrifices in order to get you there, and also a great deal of responsibility and planning around that too. Like really being driven and insisting, this is my goal. I'm not going to give up on it. I want this sense of independence. And so I'm going to make it happen regardless of whether it takes a year or 2 or 3 to get me there. I'm going to put the work in along all of those steps in order to make that happen. And again, if this is something that's kind of an inkling to you right now, and what I'm saying makes you a little nervous because you're like, yeah, that's something I want, but how? That's one thing that Saturn can really help with too, is the how, and getting those steps a lot more clear for you. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Pisces rising. So I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. And to everyone for being here, be good. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.